I'm really excited to be here with you, with this group of people. As our hosts mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the recognition of organizations as living systems, living ecosystems. And in my experience, in my work, I've seen that perspective has been brought to life most powerfully, most effectively by two disciplines. The first is organizational development, and I think that's about half of you here. And the other is in software development, and in particular in the world of agile software, project management. So to bring those two groups together here is really wonderful and exciting, and I can't wait to see what comes out of the intersection of our work together. So I think most of us know that the story we've inherited, the story that we're moving away from, but that's still very present in the world, the Dilbert story, is one of organizations as machines. And in that story, people are separate from the machines, employees and customers. Community doesn't come into the picture at all. The environment, for sure, doesn't come into the picture. I always imagine it like a meat grinder. You know, do you remember those old-fashioned meat grinders, and you put different resources and capital into the machine, including human resources and human capital, and you turn the crank on the side, and that's the organization, the processes and the infrastructure, and only that is the organization. And out the other end comes a product that falls into the hands of a passively waiting customer. And that's all that's going on, right? And it's only about productivity and profitability. So that story has served us relatively well for decades. It has done good things for us, and there is some truth to it and some usefulness to us. But it's not the whole story, clearly. And what's more, which button is it? Okay. What's more, it leads to problems. Really serious problems in ourselves as individuals, working in what has become toxic workplaces, and in society and in the environment, right? It's clear that story is not enough, and we need to find an alternative to it, or add another chapter to the story, or even shift the plot line fundamentally. And so that's where we see the emergence, luckily, of a new story, a living systems perspective on organizations. And in this, we see that the organization is truly, not even metaphorically, but truly a living ecosystem. In French, we have the word organism to mean organization. Somehow here we understand that fundamentally, right? So this is the focus of my work. And again, it doesn't mean that the old story is completely wrong and we leave it behind, because every living system does have mechanistic characteristics, but it's not the whole story. So we need more. And we see the language of living systems emerging all around us, this language of self-organization. Machines don't organize by themselves, only living systems do. Agile, again, machines are not fundamentally agile, but living systems are. Resilience as well, business as ecosystem, and learning to live with complexity. Machines are complicated, but they're not complex. Complexity is when there are more variables than we can control and more interactions than we can predict. So this is an encouraging sign that the language of living systems is coming up in our business world. So this is how I speak about this perspective of organizations as living systems. I talk about moving past the concept of sustainability to embrace a concept of thrivability. Machines can be sustained over time. That concept is important, continues to be important, but it didn't take us to the point of challenging the fundamental underlying story. And so it left us tinkering with the machine and making changes here and there, but not fundamentally shifting the story. And so I talk about thrivability as the informed intention and practice of creating the conditions for life to thrive at every level in our organization, for people working within the organization, for the organization itself as an ecosystem, for customers, for community, and for biosphere. And different people have different conditions that they identify and work with, and I have my own set. But whatever your lens is, as long as your intention is set on creating the conditions for life to thrive and asking questions, what would create more aliveness here in this meeting, in this gathering? How can we design for life to thrive? You're off to a good start. So In this new story, as we start to recognize our organizations as living systems, it shifts the purpose of coming together in organization beyond just productivity and profitability. And it starts to become contributing to more aliveness and thriving, and in ways that only we can. So I love some of the language that you used, Vikas, that it's really about finding what we as a team working within an organization can contribute, especially to more thriving and aliveness at all of those levels that I mentioned. It also starts to become not only transactions, not only the productivity and that churn of the meat grinder, but transformation. Life exists to connect with other forms of life in order to be transformed, to learn and evolve and grow through those interactions. And so we can use this lens to ask ourselves, what more would it take, what has to be true, if this gathering together in organization is to be transformative? What else is possible? We start to open up to that question and that possibility. And the greater the depth of that connection and the more it approaches love, the more potential there is for transformation and for impact. So there's a theme that we didn't even plan. But in the machine story, love has no place. The human spirit has no place. But in a living ecosystem and a living organization made of living people, it's the primary driving force and purpose that brings us together. So in bringing this lens, it opens us up to love. And then with those intentions, organizations can become playgrounds and practice grounds for becoming fully human and alive. And how different is that from the world of Dilbert, right? And how much more engaging and creative and appealing is that? This is where we can go. We have examples of organizations that are moving in this direction. It's available to us. So let me tell you a story of my favorite client organization. Many of you will know this organization. And this is one example of a group of people who embraced that view and that opportunity. This is what was known as the Montreal Nature Museums, the Biodome, the Insectarium, the Botanical Gardens, and the Planetarium. These are 4 institutions that are all owned by the city. They were separate institutions. And then about 8 years ago, the mayor decided to merge them administratively. Partly to save some money, you can fire some of those HR and finance people because it's all the same, right? They're all nature museums. And so what's the difference, right? The other reason, though, was that he had something of a vision that together they could have a bigger impact, they could be more visible, and that one brand could be created to represent all of them together, and that might put Montreal on the map more powerfully than they do separately. So it sounds good. The problem was that they were not really into this plan. They felt very distinct with different scientific disciplines, different ages, different sizes, so they were not very interested in being merged. And they really didn't connect with this new name that was given to them, the Montreal Nature Museums. And the population of Montreal and visitors didn't recognize it either. Did anybody ever, do you know this, Montreal Nature Museums? No. So the mayor decided to hire someone, a new, very charismatic and visionary director who's still there, really fantastic person, to create this new brand and to create one cohesive culture. Again, the problem was that he came from the world of circus and dance. And so all these scientists and educators and museologists were really scared that he was going to turn them into the next Cirque du Soleil or Disney or something like that. They were also really not interested in becoming a brand. They were very skeptical of marketing and were afraid that they would become kind of McMuseums. So the director hired my colleague and me, and the first thing we did was to bring all 450 people together from all 4 institutions. They had never been all together in a room before and in conversation together. And we shared with them this perspective of the organization as a living ecosystem. It was really exciting to be with nature scientists and biologists to be sharing this perspective. And of all people, they really appreciated that. And we helped them explore those different fertile conditions that have to be present if they are to thrive and to have the impact they want to have in the world, and have the impact for themselves as well. So basically, the core question we were asking them was, what's the one conversation that you all want to have with the world? What is it that brings you together? And then what has to be true if you are going to have that conversation with the world? At the end of that day, we drafted a manifesto. First draft, brought it back to the directors of these museums, and we said, does this sound authentic? Is this what you said? How do you like it? And they said, it's really good. It's good. There's just one problem. You used the word life. And we don't talk about life, we talk about nature, because we're scientists, and nature is out there, and it's measurable and tangible. And life, it's kind of amorphous. You don't really know what it is. It might even be spiritual. So could you just change that word and make it nature instead? So the director and my colleague and I, we all said, wow, this is interesting and probably important, because you are mostly biologists, right? And if you're uncomfortable talking about life, then who can? And maybe there's a connection between our inability to talk about life and our decreasing ability to sustain life on the planet. Maybe this is the one conversation you need to have with the world. So they really took that to heart and went through about 6 months of collective soul searching to come to terms with this. Can we really say this out loud? And not only say it, but say it loud. And in the end, some of you will know the punchline already. In the end, they chose a new identity for themselves. They are now Espace pour la vie. They are space for life. They kept their individual identities, which is important in a living system. We encourage the diversity and the divergence of the parts, but we also bring them together in a transcendent, convergent whole. So it wasn't only a name change, and they will tell you this is not a brand. This is a conversation. This is a movement and an invitation. So it didn't only change the name, it also led to changes in their org chart. They restructured in order to be more in line with those fertile conditions that we helped them explore. They changed their exhibits to be far more engaging and interactive and co-creative. They changed how they interact internally, how they structure meetings, so that life was always at the center instead of the crank on the side of the machine, right? And most of all, maybe the sort of most tangibly, externally visible outcome was that this story, the deepening of their story was so compelling that while they had struggled for 9 years to raise enough money to renovate the old planetarium and failed, they never were able to do that. With this new story, in 1 year, they were able to raise $190 million and build a new planetarium, LEED Platinum, and do 4 other projects that are now underway. So there's something really powerful in not only deepening the story, but in engaging life and in transforming yourself and your organization in that way. So that new story invites us to see ourselves not as drivers of a machine, but as stewards or gardeners of something precious and alive. There's something in recognizing life that does invite love, and maybe the two are synonymous, but really to see each person as precious and alive, and the whole of you as well, and your customers and your community. It invites us, this new story invites us to engage in conversation and co-creation as the most appropriate way to be in interaction, moving beyond the transactional into the transformational. And so much of the work that I know all of you are doing is based on structures of conversation and co-creation. And this is why, because it invites the most life possible. We have to build structures that support connection and resilience and adaptability. Open and free-flowing networks of connection, right? Just enough consistency and structure and not more, and as much flexibility as possible. This is how life operates. We have to design collaboration, creativity, learning, and play into how work gets done. Play is not the opposite of work. Play is the highest form of work. Play is how we innovate best, how we collaborate best, how we create best. And it's a sign, when it feels like play, that's a sign that we're thriving, right? That we're doing things right. And it's practical play. So we design into everything we do that level of play and collaboration and learning. Life is about learning, most of all, as a pathway to transformation. And fundamentally, this new story invites us to serve life in everything we do, to be in service of life, to be in the question always of what would create the most aliveness and thriving in this moment, in this situation, in this project. And it's not only for ourselves. You know, that picture I shared of the happy person leaping in the field is wonderful for us as individuals to move away from a toxic workplace into something more fulfilling. But really, the organization has the potential to be the temple of our times, to be the place where we come together across differences, again, and there are so many differences, so much polarization in the world right now that we need a practice ground where we can transcend those and build together, drawing on the one thing that we all have in common, which is life. So let's go do it. And this room full of people is uniquely capable of leading the way. So thank you very much.